How can we be who we're meant to be based on the vision of our faith if we're denied the right to present what we believe is true nature of the human person?
Where we get our hope from as Christians is that Jesus is still on the throne. That's not changed.
And the government have effectively creating blasphemy laws to outlaw Christianity, the foundation of our nation.
When children will be greeted by staff asking them, which pronouns are you using? What do you mean? They are confusing kids unnecessarily.
So that's why the Bible is our foundation for the communion. Of course, Christ is our foundation for salvation. And we follow him when we follow the words of the Bible.
Well, we have to see the bigger picture. If we don't get everything we want, that's no reason to give up. You keep fighting
It wasn't
more.
until Christians said, yeah, you killed your babies, what are you going to do about this? God had a solution, but the solution wasn't going to be effective if I didn't first acknowledge that I needed that solution.
Right. We are here until we have a law which allows babies to have the same rights as everybody else, and we're not going to go away. I can guarantee that we won't.
May we continue to boldly stand as a light in the darkness, a voice for truth and a force for good.
Hello everyone, welcome to Christ Stand Podcast, a podcast by the Young Conservative Christ, available on YouTube, Spotify and Apple Podcasts, with clips going on YouTube and Instagram, and the links to all these are in the video. I'm Martin, the National Conservative Christ, and today I have a very interesting and more important episode where we'll be talking about the hate crimes bill that passed Parliament. Very big implication for free speech. And so to talk about it today, I have John Steenhof from Law and Alliance. He's the principal lawyer there. John, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you, John. A pleasure to be here.
Yeah, it's great to have you on. And now, just before we get into the hate crimes bill, I'll just briefly ask you about your journey to become a lawyer and then how you came to be the principal lawyer at the HRLA.
Sure, John. So I have a long provenance that moves through Canada, through New Zealand, and then to Australia. The last bit of that is me moving to Canberra to set up the Human Rights Law Alliance. Studied law in the late 90s, practiced in commercial law for many, many years, and then set up my own law firms. And as I was doing that, I realized that increasingly society was turning hostile against faith, that Christians were no longer free to share their faith in the public square, and often people were facing consequences for it at universities and the workplace, people looking to foster children or take up public service opportunities were getting discriminated against because of their Christianity. We ran a few of these cases pro bono, and then when the opportunity came up to start a law firm in Canberra in 2019, I moved over to Canberra with my wife and my 6 children. And so now we operate a litigation firm. Our aim is to run cases that defend Christians who get in trouble for their faith. And we want to make sure that we have a positive impact on Australian law and Australian culture to stand up for religious freedom, and particularly for the freedom of people to live and speak the truth without penalty. And so we've run a number of cases through the years that have had quite a high profile, won many of those cases protecting Christians and indeed people who are people not of faith. And we've also dealt with hundreds, probably over 1,000 inquiries from everyday Australians who face hostility, and we've helped guide and navigate them through potential losses of jobs or other legal implications for them. And it's work that I do because I am a Christian, and I think that it's important that we use our gifts for kingdom service. This is where I've chosen to apply my talents, and it's a great blessing to stand alongside brave Australians who stand up for truth.
Yeah, that's really interesting. Very important, especially we'll see in this hate crimes bill, which this was written to Bondi terrorist attack. Leasing of it only had 48 hours of public consultation, which says something about the bill. And the purpose of a majority of the bill is to to supposedly crack down on hate speech and hateful. Now, a fundamental part of this is trying to criminalize hate speech, and that's very tricky as objective. And to talk about this bill, maybe you could highlight the trying to hate speech.
Yeah, it's very interesting that this bill was passed under urgency. As you said, there was very little time given for anybody to review the bill, particularly opposition and other MPs in Parliament, but also everybody else who was there to make submissions. Now, there's no doubt that there are certain situations which require urgency. When you have two men shooting into a Jewish celebration off a bridge, it's paramount that police get there urgently and that those gunmen get shut down urgently. And then it's also really important that we have a timely response to that to try to analyse what is the cause of this kind of violence and what's the proper measured response to it. Those kinds of responses don't necessarily require such urgency. And I have yet to hear anyone who can explain to me properly why these laws, which have such a fundamental effect on freedoms, these hate speech laws, the hate bill, it was necessary to pass it in such a rushed fashion, particularly where it covered off so much ground and where it had such fundamental effects on freedoms, which the West has rightly identified as being fairly important freedoms for a just and democratic and flourishing society. So the speed itself should be a cause of concern for anybody who saw these laws and didn't quite understand what happened in that whirlwind that happened last week as at the time of this recording. It's also a process that chopped and changed. So originally, the bill that was presented did include a new hate speech offence. And it would be a hate speech offence that was tied to any speech that was inciting hatred on the basis of race, ethnicity and national origin. So it was really tied to a racial type hate speech offence, whereas in Australian law, we often have other offences that cover a broad range of hate. This was narrowed down. It was called the Combating Anti-Semitism, Hatred and Extremism Bill. Really interesting that you've got this bill. It doesn't use the word anti-Semitism, I think maybe once in the whole 300 odd pages, and that's in the title. So it doesn't actually target anti-Semitism. And it has the word hate everywhere, but it never actually defines substantively what hate is. So most of the parties were in an uproar at this hate speech provision, which was going to criminalise certain kinds of speech. And when I reviewed that provision, it was my view that there were a lot of situations that might be caught by that would really not be properly caught by a hate bill. And so other politicians saw that, and that was excised from the bill, and a modified chopped down version of the bill was passed that removed the hate speech part. So in reality, what was passed doesn't prohibit hate speech directly, but there are huge concerns and flaws with what was passed because it does indirectly criminalise hate speech or ostensible hate speech, because it has a regime for naming groups as hate groups and then prohibiting anybody from promoting those groups, from being members of those groups, from funding those groups, etc. And if you had to look at what are the main problems in a nutshell with this law, it is that it is so open textured, it is so ambiguous, and it gives so much unaccountable power to government that it could be used against valid groups that are representing real political causes. In other words, government could misuse this law for censorship. The other concern is that it now introduces this ephemeral concept of hate crime into our criminal law. And I would argue that talking about hate crime is going to be very difficult because we're talking about actions or potential actions that are based on a feeling. The criminal law should always be about, as much as possible, punishing objective conduct by a particular party. So there's some real concerns there, and I'm sure we can get into those as we go along. There's concerns with process, and there's concerns with content, and there's concerns that what's been told to Australians about how these laws are going to work is only partially half the story.
Yeah, exactly. And to your point, when we talk about hate crime, in the bill it says that a hate crime involves publicly inciting hatred for a group of persons because of the race, and national, or ethnic origin. Further down, explaining it, it says that in all the circumstances, it could cause a reasonable person, target or a member of the target group, to be intimidated, to fear harassment, violence, or to fear for their safety. It's a very subjective definition. Sort of thing the last couple of years, anti-vilification legislation, where the threshold for offence has been lowered and lowered. It's a very dangerous bill.
Certainly. So the provision that was excised, the bit that was the hate speech crime that was going to be added to an existing suite of hate speech crimes. And in my view, the risk was that people could get in trouble who are not actually participating in the kind of speech that would incite actual violence. So, for instance, a street preacher who said something like, "All Jews must repent and turn to Christ or they will go to hell," could face criminal penalties. And yet that is exactly the orthodox teaching of the Bible, that all must repent and turn to God. But it wasn't just religious people who would be affected. It was indeed possibly those who are on progressive and left-leaning causes where they are criticizing people on the basis of their national affiliation. So, for instance, a speaker at a protest rally who criticizes the nation of Israel and states that it's committing genocide in Palestine could be arrested and charged for hate speech crimes. Now, that part of the law has been, or the proposed bill has been removed, but it shows the kinds of activities that might fall under the umbrella because of the poor way that the law was structured. And there's many different weaknesses to that hate speech provision. And I suspect we're going to see further attempts in the future for governments to introduce that provision, to widen that provision so that it doesn't just apply to nationality and ethnicity, but will also apply to other protected attributes. So for Christians, that's a particular concern because a lot of Christian ethical and moral teaching is completely opposed to the modern system of sexual and identity and ethics. And for Orthodox Christian teaching to potentially be branded as hate speech is going to have a significant chilling effect on those who want to freely speak about these contentious issues and speak about dangerous ideologies in Australian society. So there are some real concerns with the direction that we're going with these laws, as well as the laws themselves.
And so one very concerning part of this bill is where it says that procedural fairness is actually required. And it's a very shocking, explicitly said statement that's in the bill. And I was wondering if you could explain what that relates to and how that can even be.
Yeah, that is certainly a concern, and it sits within a whole layer of sandwiching concerns which effectively dilute the powers of this, dilute the protections that are given to ordinary people from being included within some sort of hate designation. Ronald Reagan famously said there are 9 words that are the most scary words in the English language, and they are, I am from the government and I am here to help. Well, I would say in the 21st century, there are 11 words that are the most scary, and those are, I am here from the government and I'm here to protect your safety. And this is all designated towards protecting people's safety by criminalizing certain hate groups. So this bill that's now passed into law is going to put in place a system for designating certain groups as hate groups. And once that group is designated as a hate group, it then becomes a criminal offence to be a member, to be an organiser, to promote, to be an official active for it, or to praise that group for what they do. It'll also plug into a regime which says that their hate symbols can be banned and appropriated by police. Now, this is a fundamental change from how you would usually expect criminal law to work, because ultimately what it does is it allows a government agency to assess not actual conduct, but what they think is the risk of certain conduct, and then ban someone or a group and criminalize those who are involved in that group without any real oversight by the court and without any fairness of process. Now, this is a fundamental attack on what we understand in the West as the rule of law. The rule of law is very important, but very boring. The fundamental rules that we all accept as making for good government and good lawmaking, things like the right to a fair trial, the right to know what the accusations are against you, the right to have a judge who is impartial, the right to a defense or defense lawyer, the separation of powers, that you don't have the same person who is making the law, enforcing the law, and then telling you what the penalty is. So we have those baked into our Australian Constitution. This law runs pretty roughshod across a lot of those things. And to be honest, it's not the first law to do that in Australia. If you look at our immigration system and how the Minister for Immigration can control people coming in and out of Australia, got incredibly broad powers with very little court oversight. And arguably, you can have that when you're dealing with people from other countries and should give the executive those powers. But this hate speech law will apply to citizens of Australia, people who have a right to live here, who have rights of association and political action. It could have a potentially very big chilling effect on that. Now, there's some important caveats. We're going to talk about risks in the bill and bad things. There are some protections in the bill, and that's important to note that it only relates to conduct about nationality, race, and ethnicity. So none of the other political causes are going to be relevant or get you unwittingly caught up in a hate group designation. The other thing is that there are some tightening provisions that were put into the law as a result of the Liberal Party getting involved in it. And that has definitely tightened up how the process for designating a group as a hate group. Now, you must have the director of ASIO writing a letter saying that he has real reason to consider that this group has engaged in hate crimes, violence, damage to property, etc. And you can only start the process of naming a hate group if that process is gone through. It's much stricter than it was in its first iteration. The second big thing, well, the third big thing about the laws that is an important caveat is just because laws are flawed and they have risks in them that they could be misused, doesn't necessarily mean that they will be misused. So just because we talk about some of the potential outcomes under these hate laws doesn't mean that government's going to actually do that and misuse the laws to try to censor political speech. So that's really an important caveat. But what we're doing now is moving from a system where you would look at things you were allowed and not allowed to do and understand those very clearly. And then you knew that if you did something like that, you would face criminal prosecution, right? So you know that if you go to your neighbor's house, set it on fire, that you're probably going to be criminally prosecuted for arson because of the actual act that you did. Or you know that if you get into an altercation with someone on the street and you punch them in the face, that you could be charged with criminal assault for the actual thing that you did. Now that's regardless of motivation. That might come in at sentencing time. But in this law, it's not what you actually do. It is the risk associated with your proximity to some group or to some political movement that is going to get you into trouble. So the law is very clear that you don't have to satisfy a test of, did actual violence happen? Has this person been associated with actual violence or actual property damage? It's sufficient to start off this chain of nominating someone as a hate group, merely that they consider that there is a reasonable risk. So in many ways, you could have a hypothetical hate group, a hate group that has never been involved in violence, that has never actually said anything that is directly inciting violence against someone on the basis of nationality, race, ethnicity, and yet they get determined to be a hate group. That's concerning in and of itself. The other concern that goes along with it is that the process is largely inscrutable. You don't know that you are part of a hate group or have been designated a hate group until such time as you are designated a hate group. So there is no right for you to be notified by any government official that you are being investigated as a potential hate group, no chance to give any sort of submission as to why you shouldn't be considered. There's no independent body or any body of real weight that's going to be representing potential hate groups or acting as a safeguard against this being used for political means. What happens is the director of ASIO writes a letter saying, we think that this is a hate group based on the risk of there being hate crimes. Then the director of AFP decides that there's going to be a designation of that hate group and then gives written advice to the government. There are various other people who are notified of that, but the first time that an actual group is going to know about this is going to be when they get designated a hate group. And that should be concerning because this is being done to actual citizens, potentially to actual citizens of Australia.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a very, very concerning. As Christian, in the modern era, as you said, our Orthodox Christianity is now being seen as hateful and bigoted. The subjective definition of hate, we can easily get caught up in the recent legislation we've seen over the past couple of years. What do any potential for Christian churches to be labelled as committing hate crimes or being designated as a hate group, or do you think that's potentially not exactly what this is, the legislation?
Yeah. Yeah, there's a lot of concern about that this has been a real imposition on religious freedom. And I think it is, but not in the way that people think it is, that churches are going to be designated as hate groups. The main protection for churches is that this relates only to conduct, speech, actions that relate to nationality, ethnicity, and race. And it's very unusual for churches to take positions on things that touch on nationality and race. At law, the only real ethno-religious groups that I know of are Jews and Sikhs. So even if you had very loud criticism of the religion of Islam as a religion that's, say, violent or has exported terror, or that you said we should stop immigration from from Islamic countries, the criticism of Islam won't bring you within the purview of this law, because you're not criticizing a nationality, a race, or an ethnicity. Becomes a little more blurry if you're criticizing particular ethnic groupings or national groupings. So you say, we should have no more refugee entries from Pakistan or Afghanistan, because then you are definitely criticizing maybe an ethno-religious group of Asian Islamic people, Arabic Islamic people. But that's sort of a stretch and on the fringes. I don't think that's a real concern. So at the moment, the hate group designation system is fairly limited. And I don't think that many churches are reasonably going to be caught by it. I don't think there's a real risk. However, this is the camel's nose in the tent. We have a system now which is designating groups on the basis of their actions or potential risk as hate groups and imposing really large criminal penalties on them. And there's no sensible reason why you wouldn't extend that. Why should it only apply to race? Why wouldn't it apply to all sorts of other attributes that people might have that society thinks you shouldn't be allowed to criticize? And that's when it starts to get into the real threat to religious groups, because just because it's limited in application doesn't mean that it doesn't have fundamental flaws, and it does have real fundamental flaws in the way that it works, in the accountability, in the discretion given to government to use it. All of those things are not cured by saying, well, don't worry about this because it only applies when you're talking about someone's ethnicity or taking action in relation to someone's ethnicity.
Yeah, no, that's it's really the sort of slippery slope type legislation that's been coming in the last few years. And my final question on the bill itself is, we're talking about more political type speech. Does this just relate to public speech, or can this also be targeting private speech as well?
So again, the speech part of the bill was taken out, and that would have covered both public and private speech, particularly private speech if in any way it was viewable by the public. So conversations that you had in semi-transparent online groups, that would have been easy under those laws to be able to get you for a hate crime for. This is something that happens regularly in the UK. People are having dinner. A police officer knocks on the door, says, we've been informed that your tweet offended somebody, we need you to come down to the station. And the kind of structure of these laws was very similar to the UK ones and would have given similar powers, but that's gone. This is going to be about indirect penalising of private and public speech by designating groups hate speech groups. So it's not a direct line from a certain tweet to you being clapped in irons and put in prison, but your association with a group might be what then gets you clapped in irons as someone who's promoted or praised or publicized. It's really interesting that this potentially covers both left and right. So, for instance, an Australian patriotism group that loves Australia, marches around with Australian flags, and says we should cease immigration from these Islamic countries. Possible that, say, ASIO could say, we think this is going to lead to violence, aggravating tensions, and start the process and designate that group as a hate group. But equally, the law is flexible enough that a pro-Palestine group could be designated a hate group for circulating pamphlets that accuse Israel of being a terror state and urging the public to take all action to oppose, the evil influence of the Israeli government in Australia and the support by Australia of that terror regime. So it's interesting when you see the people who voted against this bill, the rare people who did, you saw a combination of both left and right who are interested in ensuring that it's not used to shut down political speech and censor political speech on left and right. And it really feeds into the fundamental flaws of hate speech laws because they all suffer from the same key diseases. The first thing is it's always got a vague wording of what constitutes hate. You can never have a definition of hate in the bill, and so you can never be sure whether what you're saying is going to fall within the necessary rubric to get you into trouble. There are always subjective elements to these offences. It's not what you did, it's what someone else perceives you to do or to be at risk of doing. The key thing is that truth and falsehood are irrelevant. So you can be saying true things, you can be relaying facts, but it could still be hate. And no victim is required. And again, in this law, we see it's not necessary that actual instances of violence or property damage need to be proved. In fact, you don't even need to show that one explicitly referred to a national grouping or ethnic grouping. It's sufficient if, say, someone uses what they call the dog whistle terms. That's trying to cover statements which are on their face not a criticism, but are actually targeted at a group. Something like from the river to the sea, I imagine, Palestine must be free. From the river to the sea, Palestine must be free. I think it's sort of aimed at that kind of thing, giving broad powers. But then that really gives broad powers to also take action on the basis of very banal speech, which is largely unthreatening. These laws are always applied in ways that certain groups, only certain groups, are protected, depending on the political biases of the public servants who are administering it. Like a classic example of this was the foreign interference laws, which were passed by a coalition government, and they were intended to ensure that there wasn't political influence by international regimes that are hostile to Australia. In other words, China, right? Guess who the first victim of those laws was, those powers? It was Tony Abbott for his participation in a conservative political action conference. And he was hit with these draconian powers saying, please explain, give us all of your international connections. Not one single Chinese influence was unearthed or pursued by this group. They used it for clear political purposes against Tony Abbott. And if there's anyone who's patriotic about Australia, it's Tony Abbott. He just wrote a history of Australia. And yet that's the danger with these laws, that only certain groups will be protected. They will be asymmetrically applied. And then, of course, is the arbitrary enforcement of these laws. It'll apply to some speech, but not to other speech. And you can see in these laws that say recognized sources in the media are exempted, whereas those who are YouTubers and bloggers and more social media reporters won't have the same protection. So you might say exactly the same thing, but depending on who you are, it changes who's governed by those laws. And it shouldn't be. It should be that if it's conduct by a reporter for ABC or by some guy who's got a YouTube channel with 5 subscribers, It's hate speech for one, hate speech for the other. And of course, the government is always exempted from the application of these. And then, of course, there's criminal provisions. A lot of the penalties in this law, 7 years, 10 to 15 years, and all not based on you having done an actual piece of substantive conduct, you might get these penalties. Compare that to other criminal law penalties, and it really is disproportionate and should be quite a concern for all Christians, even though Christians aren't the primary target. We want to see government that is promoting human flourishing, that is promoting freedoms. And so that should be a real concern. And these laws are a real concern. And the narrative that the Liberal Party plucked all of the teeth out of these laws and made them a lot more reasonable is kind of true, but also still not. They are very, very concerning laws.
Yeah, that's very concerning. Hopefully, like a lot of other laws that have gone through Parliament, it won't be used. I think to finish off, we'll feature the HRLA a bit. The work that you all have been doing defending Christians and others based. Should we maybe talk about cases and maybe mention one or two that have been significant?
Sure. Our primary focus is on litigation and advisory. So we're running cases. We won a case for a foster couple who were told that they were unsafe to foster children because of their Christian faith. Took the case, won it, so that they were free to be able to foster and not discriminated against because of their faith. We won a case for Lyle Shelton, who was the former head of ACL and is now a leader of political party Family First. He wrote a blog article saying that drag queens shouldn't tell stories to children, that it instills in them dangerous ideas, particularly gender fluidity, and can have adverse effects on them. That's under appeal at the moment, but we defended that at first instance and we'll defend it again. At the moment, we're running cases for a young Catholic who was dismissed from his job in Sydney, Matthew Squires, when he wrote on a political forum about his Christian beliefs on marriage, sexuality, on race, on all of these things. He was targeted by a hit piece in the newspaper. His employers saw it when he was standing for office for the Liberal Party and fired him. So that case is coming up this year. We're representing Dr. Gillian Spencer. She's taking on the gender clinics in Queensland, where she used to work, saying that they have been forcing her to undertake politically based treatment plans where you have to affirm a child and subject them to the risks of lifelong medical effects, from giving them puberty blockers, giving them the wrong hormones for their sex, and sending them down a pathway of affirmation rather than trying to use an evidence-based approach. That's a big case that we're preparing for right now. And we're defending lots of people where they've spoken and got in trouble for it. So a recent case that we ran was for a chef who talked about Jesus too much in the kitchens of a large hotel chain. They fired him after some complaints that were completely unsubstantiated and which he didn't get to defend. We defended him, we got him a good settlement and an apology, and he's able to go out and work again. So we've got big cases, small cases. We're always funded by donations. That's how we get our money. And what that allows us to do is to be running the best cases using the best evidence and the best barristers. But it's not cheap. It is a playground for the rich litigation. And so we are upheld by the donations of many Christians, ranging from $5 to $50,000. Everything is greatly appreciated, and we try to apply it to keep the public square open for Christians to be able to live and speak the truth and to present the gospel, because Australia is not changed by court cases or by people lobbying politicians. Australia is changed by the gospel, and we want people confident to be able to live the gospel, speak the gospel, bring the message out without fear of censorship or being chilled or being shut down or being criticised as being hateful for bringing the message of the good news. And that really is the long and short of what we're here to do as HRLA and our kingdom focus.
No, that's really good. It's really really important. Where can people go to support you, or potentially even they face these types of?
So you can go to our website at hrla.org.au, and there's an easy way to get information about us, to sign up, to get our not too regular emails, and that'll keep you updated on what's happening in the world of religious freedom in Australia, overseas, notable things that are happening. And there's also the ability there to make a donation to the work that we do. And the biggest thing people can do is read the cases and pray. Pray that the Lord will give us favor. Pray that we'll always be aligned with his purposes. You know, being involved in this square and in this field requires a lot of wisdom and discernment. Different Christians have fundamentally different ideas of whether what we're doing is even worth doing and whether we're doing kingdom work. We want to make sure that we are always aligned with God's purposes for how we should engage to love him and love our neighbor. And so a lot of prayer for wisdom for me and for our team, because it's very stressful work, and prayer for the people who are standing up and being courageous and standing for the faith. It's very hard to understand what it's like to be in that gaze when you do something, get in trouble, and there's publicity. It's like being in a crucible and you feel all alone. And we need to get alongside Christians who are brave like this and support them. And it's my privilege to do that. And they're the ones who need the most prayer. So there's lots of praying that can be done, John. Lots of praying.
Absolutely, it's really important. And yeah, thank you so much for coming. It's been really good conversation. And yeah, if you guys want to find out more links to letter and you can support them as well. John, thank you so much for the podcast.
Thank you, John. God bless.